Awesome. Okay, welcome to week 6, Introduction to C++. We've covered quite a bit so far, and this week's going to be really fun. We're going to talk about file input and output and I/O stream manipulators. So using string streams and all of that good stuff to manipulate the input and output into the console and into files and all that good stuff. So everything we cover today you can find here in the PowerPoints. The code like code is there in the week 6 folder, and then we've got two exercises reading from a file. So I've provided a .txt file for you here, and then reading and formatting from a file. So I've provided a file there, and the instructions are in the PDF. And then under the assignments and test section, go here and labs, we can see there's week 6 reading and writing to a file with formatting, and there's an actual submission drop box there. And we'll cover that a little bit later, and I'll give you guys some time for questions with that. But without further ado, I'm sharing this screen. Let me move my PowerPoint over, and let's do a little bit of a recap from last week. Who remembers? What did we cover last week? The if-else statement. Awesome, Rashmi. Nice. Yeah, we started with the if-else statement, and we talked about, first of all, we talked about the if statement, and then we talked about how you can add a second condition called the else, or the else if statement, and then you have the else, which catches all conditions. We talked about loops. Very good, Hung. And we talked about switch statements, right, Raymond? So if you don't want to use if else, if else, if else, if else, you can actually switch on a specific condition, and if it matches, then it will fire that case. Now, how do we, what line of code do we need to include in every case in a switch statement? Otherwise, it'll just fall through all the cases. A break. Very good, Raymond. Nice. Did we cover 4 statements? Jillian, so very close. I would say yes, I'll give it to you. 4 loops, four loop statements, I guess you could say, or 4 loops. What were some of the other loops that we covered? Other types of loops that we covered? We covered a while, we covered a do while. Nice. Good job, guys. Simon, nice. Hung. Do while. Very good. And there's a couple more we covered. So we've got the while, the do while. Jillian said the for loop. And then there's one more that's very similar to the for loop, but it's almost nicer to use. Yeah, Radhan, nice. It's not called a for each though, but it acts the same as a for each in Java. And it kind of automatically figures out the size of the elements in an array that we're going through. And we call it a range-based for loop, not a for each, but it's the exact same idea and sort of syntax for each loop from Java. So yeah, range-based for loop, very similar thing. So I'll pull this up here. I think you guys got it. What line of code should we include in switch statements, just in case none of the cases match what we're switching on, so that it will catch all and just kind of be a default. Nice, Bura. Very good. A default expression. Cool. So we got it here. We covered if-else statements. We covered nested if-else statements, which is basically just when you put one of these inside of the other one. We covered switch statements, which is very similar. Sometimes it's a little bit easier to write switch statements than a bunch of if-else, if-else. We've got our break and our default that we need to keep in there. It's just best practice. Otherwise, you'll just fall through all of your cases. We also talked about this, the conditional operator. I was waiting for someone to bring that up. The ternary operator, the conditional operator, very similar. You can call it either. Basically, it's shorthand for writing if the condition in here is true, then execute expression 1. If the condition in here is false, then execute what's after the semicolon, which is expression 2. And I think a couple of you guys said that this was new for you. So hopefully, well, I'll just bold it here. I'll just highlight that. But hopefully that made sense and there's no questions about that anymore, but we did cover that, the ternary operator. We covered loops, so there's the four types of loops there that we already talked about. Nested loops, and we have our inner loop and our outer loop. And oh, what's a question I can ask you guys about this? Which loop, the inner loop or the outer loop, goes faster when we're looping through a nested loop? So you have one loop inside of the other loop. The inner loop is faster. Very good. You wish you could write it too. That's funny. Yes, the inner loop is faster. If you think about it like the second hand on a clock versus the hour hand, the second hand on a clock, would be like the inner loop because there's so many seconds in each minute in each hour, while the hour takes 24 or 12 hours to get all the way around. So, yes, very good. And then just a reminder here at the bottom, major assignment 1 is due in 3 days. So hopefully you guys are getting underway with that. It's due Friday at midnight, 11:59 p.m. So if you have any questions, now would be a great time to bring them up. We can talk about them. We can cover some of the stuff in class. I know some of you guys have already submitted it, so I'm really impressed with that. Great job. Remember, this is the one where you're putting in the menu and you can add a number, you can sort by the smallest or the largest number. I had a question over email about this assignment, whether or not you can use a sort algorithm or like a sort library. You don't need to do that, okay? It's the right idea, but basically it's a simple enough operation and it's a small enough list that we can kind of build our own basic um, search algorithm kind of thing. And basically all you'll do is say if you had like a list of, how do I compare this? If I was the if statement, I would basically have my first item in my hand, which is like this pen, right? And I would look at this pen and let's say the size is 4 because it's this tall. And I'm going to take this and then I'm going to iterate through the loop and I'm going to grab whatever's in my hand that I've already saved to a variable. And then I'm going to grab whatever's in my array um, at the next index, so index 1, because if this is index 0, okay, and I've got a variable called, um, you know, current smallest number. And then inside my if condition, I say if the number I'm already holding in my hand is larger than, okay, the number that I'm looking at index 1, which let's say it's this USB stick and it's smaller, okay, then basically I'm going to update my variable that's called current smallest number, and I'm going to switch what I'm holding in my hand. I'm going to just throw this away because this is now the smallest. And then let's say I go through my for loop or my range-based for loop one more time, and I go to index number 2, which is the third element in the array, and it says like, oh my goodness, this other USB card reader is bigger. So if this is bigger, keep it. Else, then we just throw this one away. And so we're still holding the smallest one. Okay, and then we go through it a fourth time, and then we see, okay, we're getting the index at the fourth element. We see this USB stick is actually smaller. Okay, let's switch what we're holding in that current smallest number variable. And now we have the smallest object in the array. Does that make sense to you guys? So you're just basically going to create a variable, compare each size, and then only keep it if it's smaller than what you compared to, right? That way, you don't need to sort it. You don't need to put them in biggest to smallest and then grab the last element. That's more complicated than what we've covered so far. All you have to do is loop through, compare what's bigger or smaller, keep it if it's smaller, and then keep going. And it will basically push that smallest value into that variable and hold it the entire time. So if the very first element I get is my smallest variable and I'm holding it in my hand in that variable called current smallest number, and then every other thing I compare to is bigger, and I just throw those away, throw that away, compare it to the pen, throw it away, and then I just keep that smallest variable that whole time. Does that make sense? I don't know if the visual helps or not. I've got all these USB sticks in front of me, so I figured I'd try it. Is there any other questions about the major assignment that's due? Yeah, kind of like max min, Simon, except we don't have to use that pre-made function for it, right? We can kind of just create our own basic sorting algorithm, which will just have an if condition through a for loop and save the current smallest number. And then you just switch the condition sign if it's the smaller than or the greater than or the less than sign to get the smallest or the biggest number, right? Cool. Well, no questions on that. So I don't have the test up right now. We will do one later, hopefully. So I'll post an announcement for it when I do get it up. But for now, that's our little recap from last week. So no quiz this week. Little bit of an announcement about the midterm, which will be next week because your reading week is the 25th to the 29th. Okay, so next week on the 19th, we'll have our midterm, and it will basically be a collection of questions from all of our quizzes so far. So if you want to go through the PowerPoints or these weekly recaps and study up and remember all of that stuff, you can. You're going to be allowed to look at the PowerPoints while you do the midterm. Like it doesn't have to be closed book. I don't think there's any benefit in making you guys have to memorize this kind of stuff. In the real world, you're allowed to use you're allowed to use resources to help you. When you're making a program, you're allowed to ask people for help. You're allowed to um, Google code and stuff. Obviously, you're not allowed to copy code in the real world. Now, I want you guys to do your best to do it on your own without the help of anything. But if you need to go through the PowerPoints and all of that stuff, it will be open book, Blackboard, open book for code that we've written in class so far. I'd prefer if you didn't just search it on Google though, because then that's not really allowing you to go through the materials and know where to find stuff. Okay. So I will say no Google, but uh, you are totally able to use whatever we've done in class so far. It'll basically be just those questions all pulled up together to be, a longer test with a bunch more questions. So, any questions about the midterm before we move on? Great. That's awesome. Hey, well, I will stop recording this here because this is just the recap video, and then I'll record once we get into the new material for today.